Thomas Bennett gripped his fork tighter as the aroma of grilled salmon wafted through their modest suburban dining room. 20 years of marriage had taught him to read his wife's moods, and something felt off about tonight's carefully orchestrated dinner. Rebecca sat across from him, wearing the emerald blouse he'd given her for their anniversary. She'd taken extra care with her appearance, her blonde hair freshly styled, makeup perfect, not a single detail overlooked. It was the same precision she brought to her real estate showings, and it made him uneasy. Their 16-year-old daughter Madeline slouched in her chair, her attention fixed on her phone. The soft blue glow illuminated her face as her thumbs moved rapidly across the screen. "Put the phone away," Thomas said, his contractor's hands rough against the delicate stemware as he reached for his water glass. "We're having dinner as a family." Madeline rolled her eyes, but didn't comply. "Mom said I could keep it." Thomas turned to Rebecca, expecting support, but she was taking an unusually long sip of wine. When she set down her glass, her perfectly manicured fingers traced its rim with deliberate care. "I want an open marriage," Rebecca announced, her voice steady and practiced. "I've been seeing someone, and I want to continue seeing him." The salmon turned bitter in Thomas's mouth. His mind raced through 2 decades of shared history, the courthouse wedding when they were broke graduate students, the years he'd worked double shifts at construction sites while Rebecca built her real estate career, Madeline's birth, and the devastating loss of their second child to a late-term miscarriage. "You can date other people too, Thomas," Rebecca continued, as if offering him a generous business deal. "It's the modern way. Many couples are embracing ethical non-monogamy." Thomas set down his fork with careful control. "How long?" 3 months. Rebecca's voice held a note of excitement he hadn't heard in years. "His name is Adrian. He was a client. We closed on his house last quarter." Her face lit up. "He's taking me to Aspen next weekend. I thought you should know." The rage building inside Thomas was a familiar friend from his South Boston youth. He'd buried it deep when he'd built his new life, but it had never truly left him. "Dad, don't be so old-fashioned." Madeline's outburst cut through his thoughts. "Mom deserves to be happy. Everyone at school has parents in open relationships now." The betrayal in his daughter's words struck deeper than Rebecca's infidelity. The realization hit him, Madeline had known. His own child had kept her mother's secret. "This isn't a negotiation," Thomas said, his voice carrying the same quiet authority he used with difficult clients. "You don't get to destroy our marriage and call it modern." Rebecca's nails drummed against her wine glass. "I'm not asking for permission, Thomas. I'm informing you of how things will be. Adrian makes me feel alive again. Young. Desired." Her eyes narrowed. "When was the last time you even noticed me?" "I noticed everything," Thomas replied, memories flashing through his mind. "I noticed when you started working late on Thursdays 3 months ago. I noticed the new perfume you didn't buy for me. I noticed how you changed your passwords and started taking your phone into the bathroom." He pushed back from the table. "I noticed you threw away 20 years of trust for 3 months of excitement." "Dad, you're being dramatic," Madeline scoffed. "Mom's still going to live here. She's just going to date Adrian too. It's not like she's leaving." Thomas stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're right, Madeline. She's not leaving." He locked eyes with Rebecca. "I am." The next morning, Thomas found Madeline in the kitchen with a tall, athletic boy he'd never seen before. The boy had his arm draped possessively around his daughter's waist. "This is Josh," Madeline announced with defiant pride. "He's staying over tonight. Mom says it's fine, and since you're being so uncool about everything, I figured I'd follow her example of modern relationships." Thomas studied the boy, noting the expensive watch, the carefully cultivated stubble, and the arrogant smirk. Josh stared back, challenging him. Without a word, Thomas went upstairs to the master bedroom. He pulled 2 suitcases from the closet and began packing methodically. As he worked, he heard Rebecca's voice from the doorway. "You're really leaving? Over this?" She sounded genuinely surprised. "I thought you'd understand." "Adrian said." "Adrian." Thomas cut her off. "Doesn't know me?" He zipped the suitcase closed. "Neither do you, apparently." "We can talk about this," Rebecca tried again. "Set boundaries. Make rules that work for both of us." Thomas shouldered past her with his bags. The time for talking was before you spread your legs for another man. His crude words made her flinch. You want modern? You've got it. But remember, you chose this. He descended the stairs, passing Madeline and Josh in the living room. His daughter's face showed a flicker of uncertainty for the first time. Dad, her voice wavered. Where are you going? Ask your mother, Thomas replied without stopping. She's the expert on modern families now. He loaded his bags into his truck, the same vehicle he'd driven to countless construction sites while building their life together. The engine roared to life, drowning out Rebecca's voice as she called after him from the front door. Thomas had built their life brick by brick with his own hands. Now he would tear it down the same way. The contractor in him knew that before you could build something new, you had to demolish what was broken beyond repair. As he pulled away from the curb, he caught a glimpse of Josh's smug face in the living room window. The boy thought he was watching the defeat of an old-fashioned man who couldn't handle the modern world. He was wrong. The Thomas Bennett who'd fought his way out of South Boston was still alive beneath the respectable contractor's facade. That Thomas knew how to handle betrayal. That Thomas knew how to plan, how to wait, and how to strike when the moment was right. Rebecca wanted modern? He'd show her modern. But first, he had some old-fashioned scores to settle. Chapter 2. The Man Behind the Mask. Detective Frank Reeves hadn't changed much in 25 years. His office at the precinct still smelled of stale coffee and cigarettes he wasn't supposed to smoke anymore, and his eyes still carried the same shrewd assessment that had seen through Thomas's teenage hustles. Well, Frank said, leaning back in his creaking chair. Thomas Bennett, last time I saw you in my office, you were 16 and bleeding from a fight with Joey Sullivan's crew. Thomas sat in the worn visitor's chair, his posture relaxed but alert. That was a lifetime ago, Frank. Was it? Frank's gaze was knowing. Because the look in your eyes right now reminds me of that kid who put 3 of Sullivan's boys in the hospital. He pulled a file from his desk drawer. What do you want to know about Adrian Reynolds? Everything. Frank spread several photographs across his desk. Tech entrepreneur, early 40s, made his first million before 30. Likes expensive cars, modern art, and other men's wives. He gave Thomas a pointed look. You're not planning anything stupid, are you? Because that kid I knew would have already put someone in the hospital. Thomas smiled thinly. I grew up, Frank. Learned there are better ways to fight. That's what worries me. Frank gathered the photos. Adrian Reynolds has friends in high places. The kind of friends who make problems disappear. So did Joey Sullivan, Thomas replied. Didn't help him much in the end, did it? Frank sighed. Just remember, you've got something to lose now. A daughter who needs her father, not another statistic in my files. Thomas stood, tucking the file under his arm. Thanks, Frank. I owe you. No, Frank called after him. You owe yourself better than becoming what they think you are. The words followed Thomas as he drove to his latest project site. He'd moved into a small apartment above a hardware store, but he spent most of his time at work. His crew had noticed the change immediately. Boss, Miguel, his foreman of 15 years, approached as Thomas reviewed blueprints for their luxury renovation. The men are worried. You're pushing too hard. Thomas didn't look up from the plans. The renovation was in Adrian Reynolds' neighborhood, a coincidence too perfect to ignore. I'm fine, Miguel. You're not fine. You're here 18 hours a day, demanding perfection like a man possessed. Miguel lowered his voice. My cousin's a lawyer. Good with divorce cases. I don't want a divorce. Thomas cut him off, finally meeting his friend's concerned gaze. I want justice. Miguel studied him for a long moment. The kind of justice that needs an alibi? The kind that needs patience. Thomas turned back to the blueprints. And friends who know when not to ask questions. His phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. Adrian and I are redecorating the house. Your old workshop needs to go. Please remove your tools by Friday. The workshop. His sanctuary where he taught Madeline to build her first birdhouse, where he'd spent countless hours creating custom furniture for their home. The rocking chair he'd made while Rebecca was pregnant with their second child still sat in the corner, gathering dust since the miscarriage. Thomas's response was simple. Keep it all. He had different tools now, better ones. The file from Frank was just the beginning. Adrian Reynolds had built an empire on other people's dreams, their homes, their investments, their marriages. Thomas would take it apart piece by piece, using the same skills that had kept him alive on Boston streets. That evening, he sat in his truck outside Adrian's modernist mansion, watching the man who'd stolen his wife entertain guests by the pool. Adrian was tall, fit, with the easy confidence of someone who'd never had to fight for anything in his life. Thomas's phone buzzed again. A text from Madeline. Josh is taking me to a party tonight. Don't bother calling Mom to check. She already said yes. He typed back, be safe. Then he added another message to his growing file of evidence. Josh wasn't as clean as he pretended to be, and Thomas had friends in places that would surprise his daughter's new boyfriend. A sleek sports car pulled into Adrian's driveway. A woman emerged, not Rebecca this time, but someone new. Thomas snapped several photos, adding them to his collection. Adrian's pattern was becoming clear. Rebecca wasn't special. She was just the latest in a line of conquests. His phone buzzed one more time. An email from Rebecca's real estate broker, responding to an anonymous tip about ethical violations in recent property deals. The pieces were falling into place. Thomas started his truck, the engine's rumble matching the dangerous rhythm of his thoughts. The respectable contractor was a mask he'd worn for so long. He'd almost forgotten who he was beneath it. But that other Thomas, the survivor, the fighter, the man who'd clawed his way out of poverty, was awake now. And he was hungry for revenge. Chapter 3. The Gathering Storm. The diner on 5th Street hadn't changed since Thomas's construction crew first started eating there 15 years ago. The coffee was still bitter, the vinyl booth still cracked, and the waitresses still called everyone honey regardless of age or social status. Thomas was on his third cup when someone slid into his booth. A woman in her early 40s with sharp features and tired eyes that carried the weight of expensive disappointment. I'm Diane Reynolds, she said without preamble. Adrian's soon-to-be ex-wife. Thomas studied her carefully, noting the designer clothes that couldn't quite hide her tension. How did you find me? The same way you've been finding out about Adrian. I've been watching you watch him. She pulled out a thick folder. I have things you need to see. The folder contained photographs, bank statements, and emails, a paper trail of Adrian's pattern of pursuing married women, particularly those in real estate. Rebecca wasn't his first conquest. She was merely the latest in a long line. He has a type, Diane explained, spreading the evidence across the table. Successful women in stable marriages. The challenge excites him. Once he wins them over, he moves on. Her smile was sharp as broken glass. Your wife doesn't know she's already living on borrowed time. Thomas examined a photograph of Adrian with another woman, not Rebecca, at the same Aspen resort he'd promised to take her to. The timestamp was from last month. Why are you showing me this? Because Adrian Reynolds has spent 20 years taking things that don't belong to him. I think it's time someone took something back. Diane leaned forward. But you'll need more than just my help. She was right. The next piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source, Cameron Walsh, Adrian's business partner. They met in a private room at an upscale bar, the kind of place Thomas would never have entered in his previous life. Cameron was nervous, his expensive suit unable to hide his agitation. Adrian's not just destroying families, he confided, sliding a USB drive across the table. He's destroying lives. The cryptocurrency venture? It's designed to fail. He'll make millions while small investors lose everything. Why tell me this? Thomas asked, pocketing the drive. Because he's gotten sloppy. Confident. He thinks no one will stand up to him. Cameron's hands shook as he reached for his drink. But you're different. I've seen how you watch him. You're not afraid. No, Thomas agreed. I'm not. Later that night, Thomas received another text from Rebecca. Madeline's out of control. She's staying at Josh's house again. You need to do something. He smiled at the irony. Rebecca had championed modern relationships until they'd blown up in her face. Now she wanted him to be the traditional father again. His response was calculated. You wanted modern. Deal with it. But Thomas was dealing with it in his own way. Josh's father, Robert Taylor, had been surprisingly helpful once Thomas explained the situation. The boys dealing drugs at your daughter's school, Robert had revealed during their meeting. I found these on his phone. He showed Thomas screenshots of text messages that made his blood run cold. Thomas added the evidence to his growing arsenal. The pieces were coming together: Adrian's business fraud, Rebecca's ethical violations, Josh's criminal activities. All he needed was the right moment to strike. That moment came sooner than expected. A week later, Diane called with news that made his patience worthwhile. Adrian's planning a big announcement, she said. A new cryptocurrency startup. The investors' meeting is next month at La Maison, the same restaurant where he takes all his conquests, Thomas noted, including your wife. He's bringing Rebecca as his date. Diane's voice held satisfaction. It's perfect, isn't it? Everything in one place. His investors, his lies, and his latest victim. Thomas thought of the rocking chair in his old workshop, the one he'd made for a baby who never came home. He thought of Madeline's defiant eyes as she introduced Josh, of Rebecca's casual destruction of their marriage. Yes, he agreed. Perfect. Chapter 4. The First Move. Thomas Bennett sat in his apartment above the hardware store, surrounded by documents, photographs, and notes. His contractor's mind mapped out the demolition of Adrian Reynolds' life with the same precision he used for his building projects. His phone buzzed. Another text from Rebecca. We need to talk about Madeline. She's completely out of control. Thomas ignored it, focusing instead on the laptop screen where he scrolled through Adrian's business history. The man had built his fortune through tech startups, but beneath the glossy surface lay a pattern of failed ventures and burned investors. A knock at his door interrupted his research. Patricia Martinez stood in the hallway, her stern face softened by understanding. As head of the real estate board's ethics committee, she had access to information Thomas needed. I brought what you asked for, she said, placing a thick folder on his desk. Adrian Reynolds has used real estate agents before. My sister was one of them. Thomas noted the past tense. What happened? Patricia's fingers clenched. She killed herself after he discarded her. Left behind 2 teenage kids and a destroyed reputation. She met Thomas's gaze. Some patterns need to be broken. Thomas opened the folder, revealing complaints filed against various real estate agents over the past decade. Each case followed the same template: successful women whose careers imploded after involvement with Adrian. These were all buried, Patricia explained. His lawyers are good at making problems disappear. Not this time, Thomas promised. He spent the next week laying groundwork. Anonymous reviews appeared on real estate websites questioning Rebecca's professional ethics. Strategic rumors circulated in Adrian's tech circles about his investment strategies. Nothing illegal, nothing traceable, just enough to create doubt. His phone buzzed again. A text from Madeline. Josh is taking me to a party tonight. Mom already said yes. Thomas added it to his evidence file. His sources had confirmed Josh's connection to a local drug ring. The boy wasn't just using. He was dealing to other kids at Madeline's school. A call from Diane Reynolds interrupted his planning. Adrian's announcing a new cryptocurrency venture next month, she reported. The same week he's planning to dump Rebecca. She doesn't know? Of course not. She thinks she's special. Diane's laugh was bitter. He's already lined up her replacement, a divorce attorney in Providence. Thomas made notes as they talked, his mind assembling the pieces. Adrian's reputation was his most valuable asset. His cryptocurrency venture would attract wealthy investors based on that reputation alone. Get me everything you can on the crypto project, he told Diane, and find out who else he's hurt. The next day, Thomas met Robert Taylor, Josh's estranged father, in a quiet bar. The man looked haunted, clutching a phone full of damning text messages. My son's dealing drugs at your daughter's school, Robert explained, his hands shaking. I tried talking to him, but he just laughs. Says his new girlfriend's mom lets him do whatever he wants. Thomas's jaw tightened. Show me the messages. The evidence was clear. Josh was using Madeline's house as a base for his operation, taking advantage of Rebecca's absent parenting to expand his customer base. Thomas added the information to his growing arsenal. Each piece would serve its purpose when the time came. His phone buzzed one final time that night. Rebecca again. Madeline's grades are dropping. She's staying out late. I can't handle this alone. His reply was cold. You wanted modern. Deal with it. But Thomas was dealing with it in his own way. The next morning, he met with James Morrison, a former tech journalist who'd covered Adrian's earlier ventures. The cryptocurrency project is a scam, James confirmed, showing Thomas the technical documentation. He's recycling failed code from his last startup. When it crashes, a lot of people will lose money. Can you prove it? James nodded. I've been building a case. Just needed the right time to publish. Thomas checked his watch. The investors' dinner at La Maison. 1 month from today. That's cutting it close. It's perfect, Thomas said. He'll have nowhere to hide. The final piece fell into place when Sarah Foster, a city council member, reached out through Diane. She was another of Adrian's discarded conquests, and she had her own score to settle. He used women like me and Rebecca to get inside information, Sarah explained during their meeting. Then he'd buy properties through shell companies before development plans were made public. The elderly residents never stood a chance. Thomas's network grew stronger each day. Betrayed spouses, burned investors, and whistleblowers united by their desire for justice. Adrian had spent years taking what didn't belong to him. Now they would take everything from him. Meanwhile, Madeline's situation deteriorated. Thomas received daily updates from neighbors who'd remained loyal to him. His daughter's grades were plummeting, her attitude becoming more rebellious. Josh is practically living there, his next-door neighbor reported. Rebecca seems oblivious. Thomas added it to his file. When the time came, Josh's criminal activities would be exposed alongside Adrian's frauds. The boy who'd corrupted his daughter would face his own reckoning. The masks were beginning to slip, revealing the truth beneath the surface. Adrian's perfect life would crumble. Rebecca's modern fantasy would shatter. And Thomas? He was exactly who he'd always been, a fighter who protected what was his, no matter the cost. Chapter 5. The Puppet Master. Thomas met his private investigator in a quiet corner of the city library. The PI, a former cop named Marcus, had spent weeks documenting Adrian's pattern with married women. 5 families in the past decade, Marcus reported, spreading photographs across the table. Each time, he targeted successful women in stable marriages. Real estate agents, lawyers, financial advisors, anyone who could provide insider information for his schemes. Thomas examined the evidence. Each case followed the same template: seduction, exploitation, abandonment. The women lost their careers, their reputations, their families. Adrian moved on unscathed. There's more, Marcus added. He's been using these women to manipulate property values. Buy low through shell companies, then sell high once development plans are approved. Illegal? Unethical. But his lawyers keep it just this side of legal. Marcus handed over a final folder. Except for this. The cryptocurrency venture? It's a straight-up fraud. Thomas added the information to his growing collection. Each betrayed spouse had a story to tell, evidence to share. He reached out to them one by one, building a network united by their desire for justice. James Morrison, the tech journalist, proved particularly valuable. The code is garbage, he explained, pointing to lines of technical documentation. He's recycling failed algorithms from his last startup. When it crashes, small investors will lose everything while he walks away rich. Can you write it up? James nodded. I've been waiting for the right moment. The investors' dinner? Perfect timing, Thomas agreed. Maximum impact. His phone buzzed, Rebecca again, demanding he intervene with Madeline. He ignored it, focusing instead on the information Sarah Foster had provided about Adrian's property schemes. He used insider information from his conquests, Sarah explained during their next meeting. Then he'd force elderly residents out through zoning changes. Some lost homes they'd lived in for decades. Thomas made notes as she talked. Each piece of evidence would serve its purpose when the time came. The investigation took an unexpected turn when they discovered Adrian's connection to a local charity. He'd been siphoning donations through a complex web of shell companies. Classic misdirection, Diane observed when Thomas shared the information. He presents himself as a philanthropist while stealing from the very people he claims to help. Thomas's network grew stronger each day. Patricia Martinez provided access to real estate board records. Robert Taylor shared more evidence of his son's drug dealing. Cameron Walsh documented Adrian's business frauds. Meanwhile, Rebecca's perfect world showed signs of strain. Her real estate listings weren't selling. Clients canceled contracts. The anonymous reviews had grown into legitimate complaints about her professionalism. She's panicking, Diane reported after their paths crossed at a charity event. Adrian's already distant. She doesn't know he's moved on. Thomas allowed himself a small smile. The first cracks were appearing in Adrian's facade. Madeline's boyfriend, Josh, proved to be the easiest piece to move. Thomas arranged for Josh's father to receive proof of his son's recent activities, credit card theft, drug possession, dealing to minors. The boy disappeared from Madeline's life overnight. "Why didn't you warn me?" Madeline screamed at Rebecca during one of their fights, which Thomas heard about through his network. "You were so busy with Adrian you didn't even notice what Josh was doing." The confrontation sent ripples through their carefully constructed modern arrangement. Rebecca's grip on their daughter weakened as Madeline's trust shattered. Thomas watched it all through his network of informants, adding each new development to his plans. The masks were slipping, revealing the truth beneath the surface. His phone buzzed one final time that night. A text from Cameron Walsh. "Adrian's getting nervous. He knows something's wrong." Thomas smiled. Adrian's instincts were good, but too late. The trap was already set. Chapter 6. The Point of No Return. La Maison gleamed like a jewel in the city's nightscape, its exclusive dining room prepared for Adrian's big announcement. Thomas watched from his car as Rebecca entered on Adrian's arm, wearing a new dress that screamed desperation. "She still thinks she's special," Diane observed from the passenger seat. "Even after everything we've shown her." Thomas checked his watch. In his briefcase, he carried copies of everything: Adrian's failed ventures, the pattern of destroyed marriages, technical proof of the cryptocurrency scam. Each investor's packet had been carefully customized for maximum impact. His phone buzzed with confirmation messages from his network. James Morrison was ready to publish his exposé. Sarah Foster had prepared her counsel investigation. The other betrayed spouses waited with their stories of Adrian's predatory pattern. "Remember," Thomas told Diane, "timing is everything." Inside the restaurant, Adrian worked the room with practiced charm. Rebecca clung to his arm, playing the role of sophisticated girlfriend, unaware she was already being replaced. Thomas's phone lit up with a message from Patricia Martinez. "Emergency ethics hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning." Rebecca's license is as good as gone. Everything was in place. As Adrian began his presentation, Thomas gave the signal. His network sprang into action. James Morrison's article went live, detailing Adrian's history of failed ventures and fraudulent schemes. Diane's divorce filing hit the courts, complete with documentation of Adrian's infidelities. The other betrayed spouses shared their stories on social media, their testimonies forming a devastating pattern. Sarah Foster announced her investigation into the suspicious property deals. Thomas watched through the restaurant's window as phones began buzzing around the room. Adrian's face changed from confidence to confusion as investors checked their messages. Rebecca, reading her own phone, turned pale. Among the evidence being released was proof of how she'd helped Adrian manipulate property values. Nothing illegal, but certainly unethical enough to destroy her professional reputation. The evening ended in chaos. Investors fled. Adrian's cryptocurrency venture was dead before it launched. Rebecca's real estate license hung by a thread. "It's done," Diane said quietly. Thomas shook his head. "No, this is just the beginning." His phone buzzed one final time. A message from Madeline. "Dad, what's happening?" "Mom's crying. Everything's falling apart." Thomas didn't respond. His daughter needed to learn that actions had consequences. Rebecca had chosen this path. Now they would all walk it to the end. The next phase was already in motion. Cameron Walsh would testify about the cryptocurrency fraud. Patricia Martinez would expose Rebecca's ethical violations. The elderly residents Adrian had displaced would find justice through Sarah Foster's investigation. Thomas started his car, leaving the ruins of Adrian's empire behind. He had built their destruction piece by piece, just as he'd once built their family's life. The masks were gone now, revealing the truth beneath the surface. Adrian wasn't a visionary, he was a predator. Rebecca wasn't modern, she was weak. And Thomas? He was exactly who he'd always been, a fighter who protected what was his, no matter the cost. Some things, once broken, couldn't be fixed. They could only be demolished and rebuilt from the ground up. And Thomas Bennett had always been good at demolition. Chapter 7. The Fall. Adrian Reynolds stood at his office window, watching his empire crumble in real time. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls from investors, reporters, and lawyers. He ignored them all, focusing instead on the CNN headline scrolling across his desktop screen. Tech entrepreneur Adrian Reynolds faces SEC investigation over cryptocurrency fraud. They've frozen our accounts, his assistant announced from the doorway. All of them. The board is demanding an emergency meeting. Adrian loosened his tie. Get my lawyers. They're not returning calls. Neither is Rebecca Bennett. The mention of Rebecca made him grimace. She'd been calling nonstop since the La Maison disaster, desperate for explanations he wouldn't provide. She'd served her purpose, access to prime real estate listings, insider information about property developments. Now she was just another liability to cut loose. His phone buzzed again, Cameron Walsh's name on the screen. His former partner had turned state's evidence, providing damning testimony about their previous ventures. The betrayal stung less than the precision of its timing. Someone had orchestrated this. Someone had waited, watched, and struck at the perfect moment. Someone who understood how to dismantle a life piece by piece. Sir? His assistant interrupted his thoughts. There's a Detective Frank Reeves here from the Financial Crimes Unit. Adrian straightened his tie. Send him in. Detective Reeves entered, a weathered man carrying a thick file. Mr. Reynolds, we need to discuss some irregularities in your business practices. My lawyer are cooperating fully. Reeves cut him off. They're rather interested in avoiding criminal charges themselves. He opened the file. Let's start with the elderly residents you displaced through fraudulent zoning changes. As Reeves detailed the charges, Adrian's mind raced. The cryptocurrency scandal, the property fraud, the pattern of exploitation. Someone had connected all the dots. Someone who'd been gathering evidence, building a case. Thomas Bennett, he muttered. Reeves paused. What was that? Nothing. Adrian forced a smile. Please continue. But his mind was already racing through the implications. He'd underestimated Rebecca's husband, dismissed him as another cuckolded spouse too weak to fight back. Now he understood. Thomas hadn't been weak. He'd been patient. Across town, Rebecca faced her own reckoning. The Real Estate Board's Ethics Committee, led by Patricia Martinez, had uncovered a pattern of violations that left no room for defense. Your license is suspended pending a full investigation, Patricia announced, her voice carrying no trace of sympathy. The evidence suggests you knowingly participated in manipulating property values to benefit certain buyers. Rebecca clutched her designer handbag, a gift from Adrian she could no longer afford. I didn't know. You knew. Patricia's voice cut like steel. You chose not to see because it benefited you. Just like my sister chose not to see until it destroyed her. The suspension was immediate. By afternoon, Rebecca's broker had already hired Patricia's daughter to take over her listings. 20 years of building her reputation, gone in a single day. She tried calling Adrian again. The number was disconnected. Meanwhile, Madeline sat in a police station watching security footage of Josh dealing drugs in the school parking lot. The school resource officer pointed out details, the exchanges, the money, the network of teenage dealers Josh had recruited. Your boyfriend's looking at serious charges, the officer explained. Some of these kids ended up in the hospital. One nearly died. Madeline thought of all the times Josh had used her house as a base, taking advantage of her mother's distraction with Adrian. She thought of her father, who'd seen through Josh from the start. I want to make a statement, she said quietly, about everything I saw. The investigation expanded rapidly. Sarah Foster's city council probe revealed the full scope of Adrian's property schemes. The elderly residents he displaced found justice through a class action lawsuit, represented pro bono by Miguel's lawyer cousin. Thomas watched it all unfold from his apartment above the hardware store. His phone lit up with a text from Frank Reeves. Adrian Reynolds being indicted tomorrow. Thought you'd want to know. He didn't reply. Instead, he opened his laptop and began transferring funds to a trust account for Madeline's education. His daughter would need a fresh start after all this. The masks were falling away, revealing the truth beneath 2 decades of lies and compromises. Adrian's carefully constructed world hadn't just crumbled. It had been systematically dismantled by the very people he'd victimized. Thomas's phone buzzed again. A message from Rebecca. "We need to talk. Please. About Madeline. About us. About everything." He set the phone aside. The time for talking had passed. Now was the time for consequences. Chapter 8. The Truth. Rebecca Bennett sat in her family's dining room, the same space where she'd announced her desire for an open marriage months ago. Now she faced Diane Reynolds across that table, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against a wine glass she couldn't afford to refill. "You should hear this," Diane said, placing a recorder on the table. "It's Adrian's pattern. He's done it 6 times before you." The recording began to play. Adrian's voice, smooth and confident, talking to someone about his conquests. Rebecca recognized his laugh, the same one that had once made her feel special and desired. "The real estate agents are the best targets," Adrian's voice explained. "They're successful, respectable, and they have access to exactly the information I need. The married ones are perfect. They're usually bored, hungry for excitement. Feed them some lines about modern relationships, open marriages. They eat it up." Rebecca's hand trembled as she reached for her wine glass. "The latest one, Rebecca Bennett?" Adrian continued. "Textbook case. Successful career, stable marriage, teenage kid. Started with some flirting during house showings, escalated to drinks after closing the deal. When I suggested an open marriage, she actually sold it to her husband as her own idea." The laughter that followed cut through Rebecca like a knife. "He's already moved on," Diane informed her quietly. "There's a divorce attorney in Providence. They met last week." The revelation hit harder because of its timing. Rebecca had just learned that the real estate board was suspending her license. Her broker had already hired Patricia Martinez's daughter to take over her listings. "I lost everything," Rebecca whispered, tears cutting through her perfect makeup. "Our savings, my career, my reputation. All for a man who saw me as just another conquest." "Not everything," came Thomas's voice from the doorway. He'd been listening, waiting for this moment of truth. "You haven't lost your family." "Not yet." Rebecca turned, hope flaring in her chest. Thomas stood in the doorway, still wearing his work clothes, his hands bearing the calluses of a man who built things that lasted. "Thomas, I'm so sorry," she began. "I was blind, stupid. Save it." His voice wasn't cruel, but it held no warmth. "We need to discuss Madeline's future." Over the next 3 weeks, Rebecca watched Thomas move back home. He repaired things around the house, cooked dinners, helped Madeline process her experience with Josh. He was the husband she'd forgotten how to appreciate, the father their daughter desperately needed. She tried harder than she'd ever tried at anything. Attended counseling sessions, cooked his favorite meals, showed genuine remorse for her actions. Her eyes followed him with the same longing they'd once held for Adrian. She was falling in love with him again, rediscovering the man she'd carelessly discarded. One evening, as they sat in his restored workshop, Rebecca touched his hand while he was sanding a new coffee table. "I know we can't erase what happened," she said softly, "but I feel like we're finding our way back to each other. I haven't felt this close to you in years." Thomas set down his tools and reached into his workbench drawer. Instead of responding to her heartfelt confession, he pulled out a manila envelope and placed it on the table between them. "What's this?" Rebecca asked, her voice trembling. "Divorce papers," Thomas replied calmly. "This is how it felt, Rebecca, when you sat at our dinner table and informed me our marriage was opening whether I wanted it or not. When you took my choice away." The color drained from Rebecca's face as understanding dawned. You never intended to reconcile?" "I intended to teach you what it feels like to have your world rebuilt by someone else, only to have them tear it down again." His voice remained steady, not cruel but firm. "Just like you did to me." Rebecca's hands shook as she opened the envelope. Inside, along with the divorce papers, she found documents showing Thomas had set up a trust fund for Madeline's education. "The custody agreement gives you full custody," Thomas finished. I won't use our daughter as a weapon the way you did. The trust fund ensures she can attend any college she chooses, but I'll be stepping back. She needs to understand there are consequences to betrayal, even if you're family. Thomas, please, Rebecca whispered, tears streaming down her face. I love you. You loved Adrian too, remember? Love without loyalty is just another pretty lie we tell ourselves. Thomas stood up, brushing sawdust from his jeans. I'll always care about you, Rebecca. But some things, once broken, can't be fixed. They can only be accepted and left behind. Chapter 9. The Final Lesson. Thomas Bennett's network of betrayed spouses evolved into something more meaningful over the following months. They met regularly at a community center, sharing stories and strategies for rebuilding their lives. You showed us how to fight back, Diane Reynolds told him during one meeting. Not with violence or public scandals, but with truth and patience. Thomas watched as Sarah Foster described helping another woman document her husband's financial fraud. The city council member had found her voice, using her position to advocate for those who couldn't fight back themselves. It's not about revenge anymore, Sarah explained to the group. It's about breaking the pattern, stopping these predators before they destroy more families. Patricia Martinez attended these meetings too, offering guidance on navigating legal and professional challenges. Her daughter had taken over Rebecca's real estate business, running it with the integrity that had been lacking. My sister would be proud, Patricia told Thomas after one session. She didn't have the support system we're building here. Madeline struggled with his decision at first. She cornered him after a youth addiction center meeting where she volunteered, her eyes filled with confusion and hurt. You're just leaving, she demanded. After everything? Thomas faced his daughter squarely. I'm not leaving you. The trust fund ensures your future. You'll always be my daughter. But you need to understand, actions have consequences. Mom's different now, Madeline argued. She's trying so hard. That's good. She should try. For herself, for you. But some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Madeline was quiet for a moment. Josh's trial is next week. They want me to testify. Will you? Yes. She straightened her shoulders, looking more like the strong woman she was becoming than the rebellious teenager she'd been. The truth needs to be told, right? No matter who it hurts. Thomas nodded, pride mixing with sadness. His daughter had learned her lesson, perhaps too well. Adrian Reynolds faced justice through multiple channels. The SEC investigation led to criminal charges. The class action lawsuit stripped him of his remaining assets. Former business partners, including Cameron Walsh, testified about years of fraud and manipulation. He won't recover from this, Frank Reeves reported during one of their occasional meetings. Too many people coming forward, too much evidence. The reputation he valued so much? Gone forever. Thomas kept his workshop, moving it to a new location where he started teaching troubled teens the value of building things with their own hands. The kids referred by Frank Reeves learned more than just carpentry. They learned about patience, precision, and the satisfaction of creating something lasting. You could have destroyed them completely, Frank observed one day, watching Thomas teach a young offender how to sand wood. Adrian, Rebecca, you had enough evidence to bury them. That would have been too easy, Thomas replied. Better to let them live with the consequences of their choices. Some lessons need to be learned slowly. His phone buzzed, a text from Rebecca. Madeline got accepted to college. Psychology major. She wants you at the celebration dinner. Thomas typed back. I'll take her to lunch next week instead. Clean breaks, he'd learned, were sometimes the kindest cuts. One afternoon, as Thomas taught a young boy how to smooth rough edges into something beautiful, he caught his reflection in the workshop window. The masks were gone, revealing not the man he'd pretended to be for 20 years, but the man he'd become through fire and forgiveness. He had always been good at building things. Now he would build a new life, not from the ashes of what was lost, but from the truth of who he really was. The revenge he'd planned had transformed into something larger than personal retribution. His network of survivors helped others escape similar situations. The troubled teens in his workshop learned to build instead of destroy. Even Madeline, through her pain, had found a path toward helping others. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't in destroying your enemy, but in becoming exactly who you were meant to be all along. Epilogue. 5 years later, Thomas Bennett wiped sawdust from his workbench, surveying the expanded workshop that now occupied an entire warehouse. What had started as a program for troubled teens had grown into the Bennett Foundation for Second Chances, a nationally recognized rehabilitation center that combined vocational training with psychological support. His phone buzzed. A message from Madeline. Just defended my thesis. Dr. Martinez says it's the best analysis of psychological manipulation in toxic relationships she's seen. Flying home tomorrow. Dinner? Thomas smiled. His daughter had transformed her pain into purpose, pursuing a PhD in psychology under Patricia Martinez's mentorship. Her research focused on helping families recover from betrayal and manipulation, drawing from both academic studies and personal experience. Proud of you, he texted back. The usual place at 7. The usual place was Frank's Diner, where he'd first met Diane Reynolds years ago. The diner had become a regular meeting spot for their expanding network of survivors and advocates. Speaking of Diane, she turned her experience into a successful consulting firm that helped investigate financial fraud and predatory business practices. Her client list included several state prosecutors' offices and the SEC. Thomas's phone rang. Diane's number. You're not going to believe this, she said without preamble. Adrian Reynolds was denied parole again. Thomas leaned back in his chair. Adrian had received an 8-year sentence for financial fraud, wire fraud, and various other charges. His empire had been dismantled, his assets seized and distributed among his victims. How's he taking it? Badly, Diane replied with satisfaction. He tried claiming he'd found God, started a prison ministry. The parole board wasn't impressed, especially after Cameron Walsh testified about his continued attempts to manipulate other inmates into investment schemes. Cameron Walsh had emerged from the scandal relatively unscathed, thanks to his cooperation with authorities. He now ran an ethical investment firm that specialized in helping fraud victims recover and rebuild their finances. Sarah Foster called. Diane continued. The state legislature passed her bill. The Reynolds Law requires full disclosure of property ownership and development plans before zoning changes can be approved. Sarah had transformed from a victimized city council member into a state senator, championing legislation to protect vulnerable homeowners and prevent the kind of predatory development schemes Adrian had perfected. How's the support group? Thomas asked, referring to the network that had grown from their original circle of betrayed spouses. Expanding. We're opening chapters in 3 more cities. Patricia Martinez is developing a training program for real estate ethics boards based on our cases. Patricia had become a powerful advocate for professional ethics reform, using her position to identify and stop predatory practices before they destroyed lives. Her daughter's real estate firm had become known for its integrity and transparency. Thomas checked his watch. He had a meeting with Frank Reeves about their youth intervention program. The retired detective now worked full-time for the foundation, using his law enforcement connections to identify at-risk teens who could benefit from their program. Got to go, he told Diane. Tell everyone I'll see them at the quarterly meeting. Their network gathered regularly to share information, support new members, and coordinate their growing influence in business and politics. What had started as a revenge plot had evolved into a movement for systemic change. His next visitor was Miguel, his former foreman who now ran the foundation's construction training program. They'd expanded beyond woodworking to include all aspects of the building trades. The new class looks good, Miguel reported. That kid you mentioned, Joey's son? He's got real talent. Joey Sullivan, Thomas's old street rival from South Boston. His son had followed the familiar path toward trouble until Frank Reeves intervened, steering him toward Thomas's program instead of jail. History repeats, Thomas observed, but sometimes we can change the ending. Later that evening, Thomas sat across from Madeline at Frank's Diner. At 21, she carried herself with a confidence born of hard-won wisdom. Mom asked about you, she said, stirring her coffee. She's doing better. The therapy helps. Rebecca had eventually rebuilt her life, though not her real estate career. She worked as an office manager now, dating occasionally but never seriously. The trust Thomas had established ensured she maintained a modest lifestyle while focusing on her recovery. She's teaching a class at the community center, Madeline continued. helping other women recognize manipulation tactics, using her experience to prevent others from making the same mistakes. Thomas nodded, proud of both his daughter's compassion and her boundaries. She'd learned to forgive without forgetting, to help without enabling. "Remember Josh?" Madeline asked. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Josh had served 3 years for drug distribution, then disappeared from their lives. "He died last month. Overdose." Madeline's voice was steady. "His father called to let me know. He's speaking at schools now, sharing their story. Asked if he could volunteer at the foundation. What do you think?" "I think pain either breaks us or transforms us. You taught me that." Thomas studied his daughter's face, seeing echoes of both her childhood innocence and her adult strength. "Your research," he said. "Tell me about your findings." Madeline's eyes lit up. "We're identifying patterns. How predators choose their targets, how they create dependency, how they isolate their victims. But more importantly, we're mapping recovery paths. Ways people can rebuild not just their lives, but their sense of self." "Like your mother?" "Like all of us," Madeline corrected. "Mom, Diane, Sarah Foster. They all found their way back to themselves. Different versions, stronger maybe, but authentic." Thomas thought about his own transformation. The masks he'd worn as husband and father had been replaced by something more genuine, a builder not just of things, but of people and possibilities. His phone buzzed again. A message from Frank Reeves. "Got 3 new kids for the program. Their stories remind me of you at that age." Thomas smiled. The cycles continued, but they didn't have to end the same way. His revenge against Adrian had evolved into something far more powerful, a legacy of transformation and hope. "Oh," Madeline added, "I'm presenting our research at a conference next month. Will you come?" "Wouldn't miss it." They finished their meal, talking about her plans for a counseling center that would work in partnership with the foundation. The next generation of their work, combining practical skills with emotional healing. Later that night, Thomas stood in his workshop, running his hand along a piece of rough wood. 5 years ago, he'd planned to tear down the lives of those who'd betrayed him. Instead, he'd built something enduring, a network of survivors who'd become advocates, a program that transformed broken teens into skilled craftsmen, a daughter who turned trauma into wisdom. His phone lit up with messages from various members of their network. "Diane, new case you should see. Similar pattern to Adrian. Sarah, need your testimony for the Senate committee hearing. Patricia, another ethics board adopting our guidelines. Frank, remember Joey Sullivan's kid? He's teaching the new guys now. Miguel, the expansion plans are approved. We can double the program." Thomas read them all, seeing the threads that connected their work. The foundation had become a hub for multiple initiatives: vocational training for at-risk youth, support groups for betrayed spouses, financial recovery programs for fraud victims, advocacy for legal and professional reforms, research into manipulation and recovery patterns. Even Rebecca had found her place in the larger story, using her experience to warn others about the tactics Adrian had used. She'd never recovered her former status, but she'd found a different kind of respect. Adrian Reynolds, meanwhile, sat in his prison cell, his empire dismantled, his reputation destroyed. His attempts at manipulation had failed to impress the parole board. His prison ministry scheme had backfired, and his former victims had turned their pain into power. Thomas's revenge had succeeded beyond his original plan. Instead of simply destroying Adrian's life, he'd created a system that made it impossible for future Adrians to thrive. The network he'd built didn't just help victims recover, it changed the environments that allowed predators to operate. His last task of the evening was reviewing applications for the Foundation's scholarship program. Among them was a familiar name, the daughter of one of Adrian's early victims, now pursuing a degree in social work. The cycle of destruction had been broken, replaced by a cycle of reconstruction. Thomas Bennett, the builder from South Boston, had created something that would outlast any act of revenge. He picked up his tools and began work on a new project, a ceremonial podium for Madeline's counseling center. Each piece he built now carried meaning beyond its function, telling stories of transformation and renewal. The rough wood under his hands would become something beautiful and strong, just as broken lives could be rebuilt into something meaningful. This was his real legacy. Not the destruction of his enemies, but the creation of possibilities for those who followed. As he worked, Thomas reflected on the truth he'd learned. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't in destroying your enemy, but in making their actions impossible to repeat. By turning victims into advocates, pain into purpose, and revenge into reconstruction, he'd created a future where the Adrian Reynolds of the world would find no fertile ground for their manipulations. The sawdust settled around him as he worked, each cut precise, each join perfect. The builder had become more than a husband, father, or avenger. He'd become an architect of change, designing a future built on strength, wisdom, and the unshakable foundation of truth. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.